I started the Real Mental podcast because it bugs me when film and TV miss the mark about how mental health gets portrayed. Real Mental is a podcast where a film-loving psychiatrist, that's me, talks to a film critic to help people figure out their lives by getting to the truth about mental health in the movies. Welcome to the Ruthless Compassion podcast. Today we have Juan Ayala, who is an actor, journalist, and podcaster, and we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to do a TV show review, and we're going to review the show Sort of, which is a hit in Canada, and also it seems to be a bit of a hit in the United States where you come from, right?
Yes. Yeah. Definitely very, very well received and critically praised here.
Wonderful. So before we start talking about the show, I thought maybe you could just say a little bit about yourself and who you are and why it's fun for you to talk about this show in particular.
My name's Juan Ayala, as you all heard before. I'm an actor, journalist, podcaster. I wear a jack of all trades. I went to school for theater in Connecticut and then continued studying here in New York City. And I've been a journalist for the last 5 years. I'm part of the Critics Trust Association. I work for a company called Media Village. I write reviews for the website. I host a podcast there with guests each week that are from entertainment. We talk about diversity and inclusion. The show's called Multicultural TV Talk. And prior to that, I started my first podcast called Actors with Issues, which also has guests from entertainment, TV, film, and Broadway. And we sort of break down different stigmas that actors don't often talk about that you see in interviews. You do a little bit now in sort of like around award season. I think it's Variety or Hollywood Reporter will have those roundtable interviews with all of the actors who are sort of awards buzzy at that time. And it's like a 45 minutes to an hour. So they'll cover everything from getting their first agents to obstacles they face in their career. But I'm not talking with A-listers. It's with sort of folks who are coming up who are in the thick of it right now in their careers. So we talk about a lot of stuff from mental health to diversity to the various issues, given the name of our show, Actors with Issues, the various issues that actors who are on the rise right now do encounter, through social media, through the many different things that are going on there. But that's basically me. And for this show, for Sort of, I had one of the actors on my podcast, Amanda Cordner, who plays Seven on the series. She was a guest on my show earlier this year. And watching the show, I always like to do as much research as I can when I have a guest on. So I'll watch, if I can, the full season of their show as much as I can. And was just very surprised at how nuanced the show was in general. The wonderful things it does for representation. You're seeing these non-binary characters, these gender fluid characters who are people of color, who are not often represented. And if they are in a show, they're sometimes a caricature. They're there for the joke, to be the butt of the joke, or to deliver a quippy one-liner and then walk off. But here they're front and center, and it's really wonderful to see that level of representation. And I actually did get to audition for season 2 after becoming a fan. Didn't get it. So obviously, as you all know, you've watched the show, but it was just really great to get to sort of tackle that writing early on, because the writing is just so great on the show.
Yeah, it's really a very special show. And when you were talking about how, non-binary characters, gender fluid characters, and people of color are not represented, I was thinking that a lot of the times what you see on TV is that they're the victim. They're the murdered body, right?
Yeah.
that's a terrible.
The story revolves around them, but they're dead.
Yeah, exactly. That's a terrible kind of representation. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's not the way you want to represent a community on TV or in the movies, right? So I thought we could start by you giving your review of the series and the first couple of shows of the second season, and then I'll jump in and I'll give my mental health related review, where I talk about what I think they get right and what I think they don't get right, if anything, in terms of mental health. Mm-hmm. So I hand it over to you.
Yeah. So even though the show is a comedy, it is still very serious. It's very grounded as well, which I appreciate. It's not over the top humor. It's very subtle. The kids on the show are hilarious with their one-liners or whatever, but it deals with some pretty, troubling and dark material, which is really interesting to see in a queer storyline, because as you mentioned, queer storylines often in shows have to do a lot with trauma they take place during the AIDS epidemic, which is very important to see in media, but it's not all. Like, where's the queer joy? And in this case, it is, Sabi is on this wonderful journey of self-discovery, but then family gets involved. And as a Latino myself, and, many ethnic communities are still very, have tons of toxic masculinity that we all have to deal with during our own coming out journeys. But the way it's been handled on the show so far has just been handled so delicately. Bilal Sheikh, who plays Sabi, also is a co-creator of the show, and they handle their material incredibly well. They're writing for themselves and they do it wonderfully. That's not always the case, surprisingly. Watching shows, like, oh, they co-created the show, so why is it not great? Especially in comedy, lots of comedians will write a movie for themselves to star in, and it's not always the bestly executed. But in terms of this show, I just love how sensitive everything is. Everything is very personal, but still in that specificity, it's still very universal. We've all had troubles with family, with gender roles, told how we're supposed to act or dress, when it's like, says who? Society? Who are they? Because I'm part of society. So if I say different, it's valid, So I really do commend the show and everyone involved so much for being so delicate, but also being very vocal with what they're saying. They're saying it, and they're saying it loud and unfiltered, and it's really wonderful to see.
Yeah, it's almost like you're watching just some friends of yours hanging out, living their lives. It doesn't feel like
Yeah.
it's TV. It feels so not false, so like real life. And like you talk about it being nuanced and subtle, it really feels like we're just watching a slice of real life in Toronto with real people and real families. And even though it's funny, it's the kind of humor that you would expect in ordinary life, right? With cute kids making jokes or whatever, right? Like, it's just right. It just seems very natural.
Yeah. It reminds me of one of my other favorite comedies ever that also takes place in Toronto, is Kim's Convenience, which, while very funny, also has very real issues between father and son, mom and daughter, partners, sexuality, identity. And it's very funny, but it's also, during those dramatic moments, it's very dramatic and very real. And yeah, I mean, CBC, bravo, because you guys are doing a lot of great stuff with comedies, making people cry every couple episodes. Like, this is a comedy, why am I crying?
Yeah.
I mean, by the end of Schitt's Creek, everyone was weeping by the end of that show.
Yeah, well, I think there's obviously some type of sensibility up here where we recognize that comedy doesn't have to be slapstick, and it can be nuanced. It can have elements of sadness and poignancy and tenderness, and it doesn't have to be just hardy har har.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. American comedy has gone that way a bit. We're leaving behind the in front of a live studio audience type of sitcom that's very theatrical and over the top and slapsticky, as you said, and we're going more the way of subtle humor, nuanced humor with a message that doesn't feel preachy. We're just telling a story. You take it at whatever value you want.
Is there any character in the show that you particularly loved or related to, that you really felt like, oh yeah, this is the character for me, my favorite character?
I mean, the two kids in season 1 were just so wonderfully handled. I mean, the little boy reminded me a lot of my nephew, glued to his little gaming device and couldn't, not a care in the world. When they have to make a decision, they're ready to make it. And kids have so much inner strength that we don't realize. And I love my nephew to death. He's 14 now. He's not a little kid with a gaming device. Now he's on his cell phone. It's no longer his little Nintendo Switch, or he still plays it, but and then for season 2, coincidentally, it's a character I auditioned for. It was Wolf, who's a new character this season.
Yeah.
I'm, in the US, we're only on episode 2 on HBO Max. We're not as far as you all are in Canada. But I just love what I know what's happening because I read the script, so I know a bit of what's going to happen later, and just love how that's being handled. I was a very shy. I'm still very shy and introverted, but I interview people for a living now, so I've learned to break out of my shell a bit. But since then, or before that, I was very introverted, and I didn't come out until my mid-20s. So before that, I was also having this sort of identity crises and awakening and all of that. So I relate with his character very much.
Yeah, I think every single character is played with those nuances and those subtleties,
Mhm.
and they're all believable. Like there's not one dud in the mix. Like every
Yeah.
single character, the parents, you know, Bessie and her husband, their kids, like every character, even the like, you know, small roles, everyone seems very believable, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if we jump ahead toward later part of season 2, Seven's mother appears, and
Oh, really?
she's an interesting character. She's her daughter calls her an emotional vampire, and it's like,
I know a few
yeah,
of those.
yeah. So I thought, yeah, and the way she was portrayed, I think, you know, they got it right. So yeah, there it doesn't feel like there's a dud character in the whole mix, right?
Yeah. Everyone is completely written with intention, and that's the beauty of it being a small show. There's no filler. It is about this nanny and the family they care for and their family and their friend, and that's it. It's very small, and you know, there's no need even story-wise to bring in random guest characters. You know, you have Olympia who serves her purpose in the story
Hmm.
as sort of this awakening for Sabi in season 1, and this sort of just complete a disregard for the people around them and who cares what they think. I'm living my life,
Hmm.
and that's great to see because a lot of times you don't get to see that in queer stories. It's always a story of how worried they are of how others perceive them, and you have this fabulous character come in and say, "Who cares? Like they don't run your life, so why are you so worried about them?" It's great.
I
Yeah.
wanted to kind of go through some of the characters. So, since you mentioned Olympia, I wanted to talk about her because, you know, for those of you who haven't seen up to episode 2 of season 2, close your ears right now. But for the rest of
Spoiler
you,
alert.
yeah, for the rest of you, what happens is that Subby gets high at a club waiting for Olympia, who's extremely late, to show up. And then Olympia shows up with a surprise husband that Sabi didn't realize was in the mix. And
Yeah.
then they get into an argument over some stuff, which I don't need to get into right now. But Sabi, because they're so high, says to Olympia, you know, you're so flaky. You're so flaky. You never get back to me. And this is the gentlest, you know, rebuke a person could give. And Sabi is so non-confrontational, and
Yeah.
you know, only because they are tripping out on ecstasy that their lips were loosened, right? Like they never would have said it if they weren't like completely stoned. And so, you know, their true feelings come out, right? They're annoyed, at least, or frustrated with Olympia's, you know, selfishness basically, and
Mhm.
unreliability, and they say, you're so flaky. And Olympia just says like, fine, you know, have a good life, and storms off. So for me as a psychiatrist, I see Olympia as a narcissist, you know, and the positive aspects of the narcissist are that they don't care about what anyone thinks. They can be fabulous because they have tremendous self-confidence, at least on a superficial level.
Mhm.
They don't worry about, you know, the consequences of their actions, which for Sabi is probably like a good thing. For Olympia, maybe it's a little to the excess. And, you know, I was thinking about the scene after Sabi and Olympia are in bed, and Olympia throws off the sheets and starts getting dressed. And Sabi says, do you have to go to work? And Olympia goes, no. And you realize that Olympia's just leaving because there's nothing interesting for her there. But as soon as Sabi is like looking at their fingernails and Olympia goes, oh, I could do those, then there's something for her to do that's interesting
Mhm.
to Olympia, so she stays, right? So it's
Yeah.
very clear that Olympia is there for what works for her, and she's not there if it's not interesting or exciting or stimulating. And when confronted, she has what's called narcissistic rage. And she was confronted in the most gentle way you could confront a person. I mean, the way Subby did it, like I wish everybody would confront me that way, you know, like that's the way I want to be confronted. But,
Yeah.
you know, Olympia had zero tolerance for even the gentlest of feedback, of negative feedback. And that's it. She's gone. She ghosted Subby. And yes, Subby understood Olympia's role in their life and said, you know, I learned something. So I'm just going to say goodbye and thank you for the things that I got from, you know, being around you. But Olympia is gone. Like she's gone. So that to me is a very good portrayal of a narcissist. the positive and the negative aspects, and then that narcissistic rage when something happens that they don't like, and then they can cut you without a backward glance. So
Yeah.
that's the character of Olympia. Does that make sense to you as a layperson?
Absolutely. Yeah. Olympia, just, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, really. It's just their entire reaction and just being told, you can't tell them. They're just the type
Anything.
of person that if they ask for your opinion, not to give your honest opinion,
Yeah.
especially if it's not in favor of what you think they want to hear, because they just want to hear what they want to hear, not
Yeah.
your honesty. But yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. All right. So then the other character I wanted to talk about is Paul, Bessie's husband, because Paul is a psychotherapist, and he is, to me, the archetype of what we call the wounded healer. The person who's helping others, but is so messed up. I don't want to say anything about you. I don't know you, but we just met. But this guy Paul is so typical of the wounded healer. They made several scenes of him binge eating, because if you missed it the first couple of times, you're going to get it the third time, right?
Yeah.
And the guy is, he's like compulsively stuffing his face with food. And this is a very typical thing that people do when they don't want to feel their feelings. So when he's not completely clueless about his feelings, he's stuffing them down forcibly, binge eating. And he seems to be completely clueless about what his kids need. And he kind of takes advantage of Subby, right? Pushes them away when he feels he needs to assert his dominance as a father, pulls them in when he feels like he's out of control and he has needs. And so it's very selfish and self-centered and clueless. So he's kind of this entitled white male character, this, entitled privileged white male, clueless about feelings character, and also this wounded healer who, very typically is completely incompetent in dealing with his own mess, his own marriage, his own family.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, that's 2 out of 2. They got that absolutely right. The character is totally true. His cluelessness, his, come hither when I need you and get lost when I want to be the daddy. And poor Subby is just so non-confrontational and so,
Painfully, painfully so.
painfully non-confrontational and painfully trying to please Bessie. And so we'll put up with any amount of crap from Paul in order to be there for Bessie and indirectly for Bessie through the kids who they also love. So it's, poor Subby is just putting up with so much crap that another person would not put up with, because they have another agenda, which is to be there for Bessie and the kids. And so Paul gets away with this nonsense, which so many of these entitled, clueless people do, thinking that they're getting away with it because the other person really wants to do it for them, when, like in Subby's case, they're doing it for a completely other set of reasons.
Yeah.
That also rings true to you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Paul's character, I mean, I raised my hand when he said wounded healer, because just, I'm the youngest of 2. Grew up a mama's boy, always ready to help and listen when someone in the house needed to vent. I'm still like that. I take on more responsibility than I should, to be honest, in my day-to-day life, to be honest.
Yeah.
And, and put other people, prioritize them before I do my, like, it took me years to get into therapy. Should have way earlier than I did, and it would have helped a lot of heartbreak beforehand. But yeah, I just totally relate to Paul in that sense. Not so much that I'm entitled. I try very hard not to be
And
and check my
insensitive.
privilege.
He's insensitive.
Yeah.
The things he
But yeah,
says that he gets away with. So
just
yeah.
treating Chubby as if they're disposable. And it's very,
Yeah.
very frustrating to see, because I feel like we all kind
Yeah.
of know someone like that. It's
Yeah.
just, I need your help when I say so, and when I don't need you, go
Get
away. It's like,
lost.
well, come
Yeah.
on.
But it's so true. It's so true to life. It's so well done. So
Mhm,
he's kind of a pathetic character. You feel kind of sorry for him when you're not busy
mhm.
hating him, right? So it's I think he was a very well realized, fully realized character who, you kind of like hating, but you also have a little tinge of pity for, because you see how, underneath all that arrogance, he's kind of a loser. So that's interesting,
With the cool
right?
wife. Yeah.
Yeah, like he's definitely, married someone who's out of his league, right? So it's
Yeah.
interesting that way.
Mhm.
So then I just wanted to touch on Seven briefly and the mom, Raffo. So I think Seven is an interesting character because you don't get to know that much about them and what's really going on inside. And I think in part it's
Mhm.
because Seven uses humor as a defense mechanism to kind of
Yeah.
stay not vulnerable, right? They laugh about everything. They're like, ha ha, like jocular and kind of, chummy and, cool with the kids and cool with the moms and dads. And it's all a way to be, not vulnerable. And only in season 2, when they're confronting their mother later on in the series, in the season, that you start to see some of their vulnerability, and
Mhm.
you start to see some of their true feelings come out. And it's like, okay, that's where you are, Seven. But I think that Seven is definitely hiding behind humor. And again, I think that the series got it right in terms of mental health, in terms of a typical defense mechanism that people use, which is called humor. And how humor is a wonderful thing, and it's very healing and it's very nurturing, but we can also use it as something to hide behind when we don't want to show our vulnerability. Now, the character has plenty of reason not to want to be vulnerable, being who they are in the world. But just in terms of the mental health portrayal, I think the series again got it right. So that's 3 out of 3.
Yeah.
And would you agree with that? That it's
Yes. Yeah. Seven definitely has a fortress built around them, not just a
yes.
wall, but a fortress.
Yeah.
And they also take things a bit personally. Like when Sabi decided not to move to Berlin with them. I mean, they ended up dodging a bullet because
Yeah.
it didn't work out for Seven. So
Yeah.
if anything, something up above was looking out for for Sabi, not for Seven in that case.
Yeah.
But they just took it so personally. It's like not everything's about you. To me, it's a little bit of a selfish character at times as well.
Well, when you find out more about their mother, it again,
Like, oh,
there's
that's where it comes from.
complete
I'm sure.
context. Yeah, it makes total sense why they have this kind of interpersonal rejection sensitivity.
Yeah.
When you have a mother like Seven has, their sensitivity becomes very contextualized, and it's like,
Mhm.
okay, now I understand. And also the humor, the defensive humor, because the mother is so challenging that
Mm.
you could either become like really angry or you could become really funny. So you can see that Seven made the better choice, you know in terms
Yeah.
of how to deal with the childhood that they have. And then in terms of the mom, Raffo, and I think that her character is really interesting because she's a very traditional woman from a Muslim background, grew up in Pakistan, living in Canada, still one foot out in the old country, one foot in the new world, and married to a very traditional husband who, for the first season was not around and then shows up in season 2, and then his role gets bigger as the season progresses. But you can really see her evolving, and the motivator for her evolution is her love for Sabi, for her
Mhm.
child. And again, that rings true.
Yeah.
So much of what I see in the media that they get wrong is how people evolve. Their motivations for evolving often ring very false. Their process of evolution is always way too quick, and they seem to have skipped some basic psychological steps. But in Rafo's case, and then later we'll see in the dad's case as well, in Imran's case, the evolution of the parents is very, again, nuanced, that word that you brought up, very gentle, again, a word you brought up, very gradual and very well paced. So
Mhm.
it's not this sudden, like, okay, now we love and accept our child and everything is great. No, it's the way you would expect parents from that background and that, time and place to do it, and in a way that's believable. So, kudos again to the writers, to Bilal Baig and
Yeah.
Fab Filippo and all the people, because they are doing this in a way that, yes, it doesn't ring false. And I think that's why, even though it's such a small show with such a focused story, it feels very universal, because I think the way they're portraying these psychological processes, these evolutions and these stumbles and these difficult people, are so realistic that they become universal, right? The more true they get, the more universal they get.
Yeah. Completely. Rafa's probably one of my. It's hard to pick a favorite character, but I just love her progression
Mhm.
and the use of the wall that they torn down as sort of like an allegory for her progression. Like when the husband was when the husband first arrives and it's like, what happened to the watch? She said, I told you, open concept. I'm like, oh my god, it's like she's literally opening up her
Yeah.
views on the gender spectrum, on identity, and all of that. And
Right.
in watching the recap, because you start the new season, it says previously on sort of it showed the bit where she says, so what are you, gender binary? She was like, she look, and then Sabi says, did you look that up online? She says, well, I have to research if I'm going to accept, or something like that along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. But that's just, I feel like most parents would want to Google everything they can about their child's coming out, or new expression, or the way they want to now live their lives. And I just love what they've done with the character. And I can't remember the actress name, but I love her as well. She's hilarious in Kim's Convenience. I think she was a guest star on Schitt's Creek as well. She's all over Canadian TV, and she's delightful. It's such a great, wonderfully grounded performance from her as well.
Yeah, and I guess all the characters are believable, and so we can relate to them because they feel like real people that we have met, or aspects of which we have met in our own lives, right? So the last character, of course, that I want to talk about is the main character, Sabi, played by and written by Bilal Beg, the co-creator of the show. And I think, when you think of the title of the show, sort of, some people might think, oh, it's about their sort of gender identity. But I think sort of is really about the real issue with Sabi, which is their ambivalence, right? To me, they are a representative of ambivalence. They want desperately to be loved and approved of by their parents, and yet they also want desperately to be true to who they are, right? They are super ambivalent about Bessie, who I think they are secretly in love with, and yet when Bessie was, when they were saying goodbye because they thought they were going to Berlin, and Bessie was saying, I'm going to miss you, Sabi, Sabi did not turn around and say, I'm going to miss you too, because of this ambivalence, right? And they are ambivalent about so many things. There's a scene where they've gone to their parents' house and they're wearing a beautiful dress and lots of jewelry and makeup, and the uncle and cousin are coming over, and mom says, you can't wear this, go upstairs and change. And they go, no, I'm not going to change. And then they go to the door, and one look is all it takes, and they go upstairs and they put on a sweatshirt and jeans, right? So they want to be themselves, and then it takes very little, because they're so afraid of being disapproved of, right? So they have this profound ambivalence. So that's, I think, the sort of the show. I don't think the sort of is really about the gender issues. I think the sort of is about, how hard it is for them to know what they want. Do they want to be a nanny? Do they want to go to Berlin? Do they want to have a career? Do they want to be in love with person A, B, or C? Like, they don't know what they want, right? And I think that's their sort of. Does that ring true to you?
Yes, it's a multi-layered title for sure. I think and it's with almost every character is sort of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. They're like dipping their toes, but not sure yet. Sabi with how they want to express their identity, and Seven with how they are living their lives. They want to be this artist, but then things don't work out, so they're forced to sort of revert back to square one. And even with characters like Olympia, I feel like even she's trying to like have fun and meet new people, but then ends up shutting people out from completely on their own, from their own doing. And with Raphael trying to, same thing, just so many characters have that sort of
Paul and Bessie also has a sort of, right? Because
Yeah.
Bessie is also like, she's saying, I want to leave Paul, and then it's like, maybe I don't want to leave Paul, right? And it's a lot of people have ambivalence in the show. A lot of people are experiencing that sort of. And again, I think for many of us, we can relate to ambivalence because everyone's been ambivalent about something in their lives, maybe not as ambivalent about so many things, surrounded by so many other ambivalent people, but that's, fiction. But I think we can relate to ambivalence, right? We can relate to not knowing what we want, or wanting two things at the same time and not knowing which to choose, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably, of all the very relatable things in the show, it's probably the most relatable, because we all second guess things in our day to day, and what if we did this? I'll never know, but we still harp on it, even though we'll never know. It's that terrifying unknown that keeps our days interesting.
Oh yeah. I remember when, in season 1 where Seven is saying, come to Berlin with me, and Sabi is saying, I can't come to Berlin with you. And you can really see how torn they are, because on the one hand, they want to please Seven. And of course, they want to go to Berlin. And on the other hand, they want to be there for Bessie and the kids. So they're like, who am I going to take care of? My best friend or this person I might be in love with, right? Like, what do I do? What do I do? And there's the ambivalence, right? Which do I decide? So I think, again, the creators got it right. They got the ambivalence spot on, and it's so believable, and it's so, again, nuanced and subtle. And so it's not like this kind of slapstick ambivalence, it's much more authentic, I think. I think that's, again, why it's done so well. That the authenticity is just, pouring out of it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think about Sabi's character is that, as we talked about, they are such a people pleaser, right? You mentioned in your own experience, I'm sure you can relate to that. So Sabi just wants to make everybody happy, right? They want to make their father happy, and their mother happy, and their sister happy, and their best friend happy, and Bessie and the kids happy, and, the people that they're going out with happy. And everybody has to be happy. And what about Sabi? And I think at some point, was it their mother who was saying, like, is this really what you want to live, how you want to live your life? And I think what Mom was really saying is, are you thinking about what you want, or are you just running around making sure everyone around you is happy? I think in season 2, the episodes progress, you do see Sabi's character pursuing more of their own goals and their own interests and their own romance, which is lovely. So they're getting a little bit more definitive. But I think that they've had to really struggle with that people pleasing, and like going upstairs and changing the clothes, right, when the cousin and the uncle come along. So that people pleasing, I think, again, is very true to life, very much about, the kinds of things we do when we don't feel like we're lovable in and of ourselves. We don't feel like just who I am is enough, and I have to do something extra. I have to go that extra mile and tolerate that extra crap from others so that I'm acceptable in their eyes, right? And I'm sure that there's a layer of, the whole gender issue that makes it more complicated, when we are quote unquote different in some way from the people in our lives, and especially from the family of origin, we're going to have, maybe more insecurity, sense of, not being what they would approve of. And therefore that people pleasing would be more likely. So I think, again, in terms of the mental health perspective, that character feels right on in terms of their ambivalence and their people pleasing, and also in terms of their evolution, which I think is, really important in fiction. You have to have a story arc. You have to have a character arc where there's a change, right? Where they're starting in one place and then they're going to another place. So it's nice to see them, even when they confronted Olympia inadvertently because they were on drugs, they still confronted somebody, which was amazing, right? And it was a start. So hopefully they can have more assertiveness as time goes on, and we can see more of their evolution as we get more episodes and maybe more seasons. So that's my take on the mental health. So I think that, all the characters, they got it right. I don't see any mistakes or omissions or problems with the mental health as portrayed on Sort of. I'm very impressed by the way that they have included that aspect in the rest of the show.
Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that it's partly Bilal's own story and lived experience. That's where the authenticity comes in, and it's not people writing about what they think depression is like or what they think anxiety or narcissism is like based on other portrayals in media. It is very grounded, and again, hats off to all of the writers and to Bilal and everyone for portraying it in such a lovely, emotionally driven, authentic way. I hope more people watch the show. I mean, I won't name names, but most streaming services are horrible at marketing their shows. They just will have it in the rotating programs on their home screen, and that's about it. But you don't see commercials for Netflix shows on broadcast TV. You might see a YouTube ad, maybe, but otherwise it's hard for people. This show's definitely grown more popular because of word of mouth, because of people loving how it's been handled and recommending it to others. And I will continue to recommend it to other people because it's wonderful.
And I think it's important for us to say that it's not a niche show, right? It's not just a show that people in the queer community would like, or people
Right.
in the Muslim community would like. That's a very limited perspective of what this show is about. I think it's a show that everyone would like, right? Does
Yeah,
that make sense to
completely. Yeah,
you?
it's again, and it seems niche. Like one of my favorite shows right now, which I think will probably be number one on my top 10 list this year, is a show on FX on Hulu called Reservation Dogs, which follows a group of 4 indigenous teens on a reservation in Oklahoma. And you think that sounds super specific. How could I possibly relate to that? But there is someone to relate to everywhere, and to one of the parents, to one of the kids, to their friends, to the tribal police cop that they deal with all the time. And the same goes with sort of that. These are very specifically written characters, but because of that, it's not broad. So it's not like, do I relate to them or not? It's like you will relate to someone on the show because everyone has experienced some level of what they're going through, whether it's a tough decision of what you're going to do for a living, who you're going to please, going for a relationship or not, breaking out of your shell, anything. There's so much to relate to here.
Yeah, and the characters, like Bessie, as a
Mhm.
mom, having to recognize that her children are seeing her in different ways, and having to contend with that, and how to deal with her marriage. And I think for a lot of parents, that's a very um, relatable issue. And just for Paul as a dad, as a parent, that's also a relatable issue. When you feel like
Mhm.
you're just not handling the things, you're failing to keep all the balls in the air. So I think, yeah, there are a lot of different characters that I can relate to several characters in the story. And I think that's why it's so nice, because it's at different points in the story with different things happening, anybody can relate to a number of different characters with what they're going through. Just even saying a line like, "You're an emotional vampire," to the mother, it's like so many people can just relate to that one line, and not necessarily about a
Yeah.
mother, but about any person that they've experienced who was that way, right? It's like, "Oh, I know a person like that.
Yeah.
I felt that way," right? That this person just, wants to suck all the energy out of the room, right? So
Yeah,
so
I feel like people definitely heard that line and were like, "Oh, I'm using that. I'm gonna use that." What a great way to describe that person that gets on my nerves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think you're absolutely right. We should recommend it highly to everybody, both because it's a great piece of art, and from
Mhm.
my perspective, because unlike a lot of shows that we see on TV or in the movies, it actually gets the mental health aspect correct on every level. There's no problems, no mistakes. There's no failing grades in any way in this show. So I think for both the artistic merit and because they're portraying things in a realistic way, I think we're both giving it top ratings.
Yeah. My one gripe with the show, not enough episodes. Longer season.
Yeah.
Streaming everything's 8 to 10, maybe 13 episodes these days. The days of a 22 episode season are long gone, but which is a
Well,
bummer
then
because certain shows could use a longer run. But
you need to watch Korean soap operas because they have 16 episodes of an hour. And they're all written for 16 episodes, whether they have enough material. I've watched several of them. They're really fun, but some of them there's enough material, and you have like the story arc goes right till the end, and then some of them you feel like, oh gosh, they're just trying to like write something to fill in for the last 5 episodes. So
yeah, I mean, Hispanic telenovelas are like,
yeah.
they run Monday through Friday for 3 months. It's like, close to 100 episodes. And you're like, come on, it could have wrapped this up 2 weeks ago. But,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, listen, Juan Ayala, it's really been a pleasure talking to you about something a little bit different from my end, and something obviously very familiar and comfortable for you to talk about. But I hope that for the listeners, this combo of mental health plus TV show review was a little different and a little fun. And if people are looking to find you and what you're doing, where can they find you?
Yes, firstly, thank you so much for having me. This is an absolute pleasure chatting about a show that I absolutely love. And yeah, folks can find my podcast, Actors with Issues, on YouTube. Just search Actors with Issues. You'll find a couple interviews there. We have new episodes every Monday and bonus episodes sometimes throughout the week, depending on how many guests we have, time sensitive premieres and all of that. You can follow us on Instagram at Actors with Issues. You can follow me at Instagram at Juan Ayala Official. Twitter at Juan Ayala, like iPhone, Juan Ayala. Uh, and and yeah, hopefully I'll be on someone's TV screen soon. But until then, you can catch me on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show. This was really lots of fun.
Thank you so much.
This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thanks for listening to the Real Mental Podcast. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com. While you're at it, why not check out my Ruthless Compassion podcast with over 140 episodes and counting? And if you have any ideas for guests for either Real Mental or Ruthless Compassion podcasts, please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com. Happy listening!